Blood of the Tribades is our attempt at a 1970s Western European vampire film. We try to utilize that imagery and storytelling to create a film in that style, but with a more modern sociopolitical sensibility.
We've been watching a lot of the lesbian vampire films of the early 70s, both the Hammer horror films and the Jean Rollin, Jess Franco kind of films. And we thought it'd be really fun to combine the sort of style and sensibility of those two different types of things. So you take the sort of Hammer films, and they have a lot of that theatrical kind of look at vampirism as in conflict with religion. And with the Jess Franco and Jean Rollin, there's also a religious element, but it's all really ethereal and kind of dreamlike, and it's very surreal. And so we thought it'd be fun to make a film that's both surreal and a little bit grounded in narrative.
A lot of the movies from the 70s that we were sort of emulating were made on very low budgets. And that is also true for us. We had very, very little money and resources to make this film, but we still wanted to do a very expansive movie with a lot of people and a lot of locations and a lot of costuming and mythology all built in.
I grew up watching a lot of exploitation films, and I love them, of course, because they had taboo and exciting content, and they were a lot of fun, but also because they were opportunities for filmmakers to tell stories that never appeared in mainstream film, and to have protagonists who would never be the protagonists in mainstream film. And so, as a filmmaker, I got really excited about making exploitation films because it gives us an opportunity to use genre and sort of content to bring people in to watch them, and then have the chance to tell stories and to express political ideas and to kind of share different types of views that you wouldn't see in other films.
The pitch was basically like, do you want to be the worst person in the world, like absolutely the worst person? I'd always wanted to work with them because I knew they took chances and made crazy stuff that I really appreciated. So I was like, yes, I will be the worst person in the world for you guys.
I'm half French, and I knew that they were going to do something inspired from this French director. So I was kind of like, oh, well, this is really cool. What an awesome project. If you guys wanted to do anything in French and needed help with translation or something, like, let me know.
I was actually in my bed on Facebook at some wee hour of the morning or night, and Mike had posted that they were looking for actresses to be in a short film that was based on the sort of 60s, 70s Hammer horror, Jean Rollin, lesbian vampire genre. And I immediately responded with pictures of me from a 1960s style photo shoot where I look very Hammer horror, and basically bombarded Mike and Sophia both by being like, hi, I need to be in this project. Hello, have you seen me? We know each other very well. Hi, 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 hi. And they were like, okay, Widow, like, yes, you can do this.
Like, very much so the worst person in the world, the leader of a patriarchal sort of blood cult that was bent on blaming all of the ills suffered by men on the actions of women, basically trying to be themselves and live their lives.
Oh, that would be really cool. It kind of depends if we can get actors who can speak French and that kind of thing. Like, we'd love to do that, but, you know, and then I kind of was like, a little bit timidly was sort of like, well, you know, if you're looking for actors, I've acted a few in my time.
Chris and Zach were very easy to cast as the two main henchmen because we knew we could make them look scary and creepy on camera, but they're actually two of the sweetest people that we've ever met. And we knew that they would help us make a very comfortable environment for the whole cast, especially on the scenes that were much more explicit.
And I didn't know that there was a part planned for me until it's like, hey, so you're in this. Okay, cool.
When Michael, I think, asked if I wanted to be in it, I was like, well, it's your movie, I guess.
The character of Bathor is very, very important in the film, and even though she only appears in the last few minutes, we knew we needed somebody very, very striking, both visually and performance-wise, to really sell this character and the whole ending.
I think they're specifically looking for a black woman who could really sell this character. I just happen to have a very close friend who I think of as actually kind of a sister, who happens to be this amazing, like world-class burlesque performer. The problem being that Tamisha lived in Orlando.
We'd looked at a bunch of local audition tapes and we hadn't quite found anybody that had the right magic to them. And so Seth was badgering us that he had this friend in Florida who would be perfect. And finally we were like, all right, Seth, have her send us a tape.
I just got in touch with Tamisha and was like, you have to do this. This is just awesome. This is just gonna be awesome. Like, look what this is. Read what it is. Look who you'd be playing. Like, you know, you're kind of playing the goddess here. Like, how could you pass this up? And she was like, really, really excited, like right away, which made me feel like, okay, maybe this is insanely gonna work.
So Tamisha ended up sending us an audition, and even though she was only looking into her computer screen, we could already tell she just knew the character, she had the power to do it, and she was already great. So we were like, all right, she's gonna be awesome, we'll fly her up.
I normally play characters who are already there. You know, I normally play characters who are femme fatale or who are silly or goofy. And so Fantine, coming from a place of sorrow, was new for me, and it was a nice challenge.
In a weird way, it's so opposite to who I feel like I am that it was strangely natural, and it felt like within a zone that I could do.
My character was inspired from Jean Rollin, and was sort of a very dreamy, kind of poetic French, almost like a lost in this haze.
The character of Fantine is definitely the more Hammer horror style of the two main vampire women.
And so I watched Twins of Evil with Peter Cushing.
Seek out the devil worshippers by burning them!
And it just felt like, it just kind of fell right into place. It just felt very, I think the only thing that I was a little bit self-conscious about is, am I doing like a British accent? I'm not trying to do a British accent.
If you see these movies, the characters, they often sort of have this strange essence to them, and that is indeed very dreamy and sort of erotic. And so that was one of the notes that I'd gotten. I was like, all right, cool, I can do this.
She's gone through a lot, and she sees her sister get killed and is seeing the patriarchy closing in on her community and doesn't know what to do.
I would rehearse my lines sort of marching back and forth in my living room in this, just like pacing with the hands folded behind the back. The eyebrow arching thing has just always been some weird thing I do when I'm trying to be intense and villainous, and it was like really, it just felt natural. Like I think that thing was jacked up there for pretty much the whole film.
She's lost a lot of things. She's lost her language. She's lost the memory of being in love with someone, which I think is a wild thing.
And, you know, she is the one at the meeting who says, you know, we should stay and fight. And Lilith Beast's character is basically like, shut your mouth and go along with, you know, the system.
So I'd march around in the living room doing this stuff for my wife and being like, hey Sarah, do you think this is this too over the top? And pretty much always her answer was like, it's way over the top. You really need to dial it back. I was like, oh man, damn, I don't want to come into this film and be the guy who's like, hey, I'm Granda. So how could I take it down a little bit? Well, I went back and watched some of the source material we were given, and I watched Peter Cushing again. It's like, no, I probably have to take it up.
I mean, on the one hand, she's sort of playing with a type, you know, this character, because she is sort of this Jean Rollin type. But very specifically, going into my lines and everything, you know, I realized that there's an element in which she is just kind of depressed, but maybe doesn't even know that she's depressed, you know, which is something personally that I think I've identified with at times.
I walked in, I was so ready, I was proud of myself, I had every line fully memorized and all of the cadence and everything, and I'm like, we must spill the blood of the Tribades. And I just remembered, at least Mike's face, maybe both, Mike and Sophia's face is just kind of falling and like, oh, it's Tribades. And I was calling Bathor like Bather. It was terrible, but we worked it out.
What's this movie called again? Blood of
the Tribades.
Tribades. I keep calling it Tribades, like it's like a fucking, you know, Rolaids or something.
In the script, a lot of the secondary characters weren't very well defined, and especially that's true for the male characters. So we really let the actors kind of propose their own idiosyncrasies and mannerisms and quirks and additions to the characters and worked with them to develop those.
So I was really happy that Mike and Sophia gave me so much room to work with my character and develop it into like sort of its own idiosyncratic self without a lot of telling me how it was going to be. I felt like they trusted me to develop it a little bit, and I had a lot of fun with the character.
In comedy, I really love it when characters have nuance, when they have just this sort of micro expression or just the way that they deliver a line that can often be funnier and more memorable than the actual written lines that they're saying. So I was approaching this role in a similar way, even though it was a dramatic role and the affectations weren't intended to be funny, although some people found them funny.
There was a casting call for a nursing baby, and she was nursing and a baby at the time, which she's clearly not doing either anymore.
Jacob is a fun character because he seems like he's loyal to a point. He's right down with the group to just beat the hell out of the different characters that get out of line, and he's right in line with the party up until the point where there is even the slightest thing better.
She is just like getting thrown off of her routine, and she is really annoyed about that.
I was just trying to give my character a personality, really, because even henchmen have histories and backstories, and they're they're characters that have existed before you actually see them.
They take kind of a Brechtian approach to characters and acting, where there's kind of like an intentional, absurd, unreality, which helps tell the story.
I decided to play my character. I didn't have a lot of lines. I had one line, which took many takes to get right, but I figured in this world where all these people are so invested in that character, there's going to be one or two people who are, maybe started out okay, but were sort of along for the ride.
I don't know, there was something oddly like poetic about being like, completely shamed in front of people and then having your eyeballs like gouged with a rose.
All I really knew about my character is that he's like creepy, and not in the traditional vampire sense, although that as well, but in the modern sense of infringing on people's privacy. What does a perverted vampire look like?
Well, she was obviously awful. She was not a really nice character. She was backstabbing and evil and, a traitor for sure.
They're basic vampires. I don't know about that, but they just didn't care. They didn't care about local events. If this was the modern era, they'd watch the Kardashians.
So my character had one line, and it was snarky, and to me it almost felt like a continuation of my character from the first film I worked on with Michael and Sophia, which was 10. My character in 10 was kind of snarky historian that didn't believe in any of the ghost stuff.
Most of the men in Tribades are fairly misguided, and especially Esau. He's actually helped by the women in the film, and he's still, for some reason, loyal to the men in it, which is very bizarre.
I just wanted to make a sort of fringe, weird vampire, basically, because he's the only one who masturbates to somebody through a window, so I presume it would be a little weird.
I just turned it up as high as I could and just, believed and lived the character as much as I could. And, I felt like, if this is a dangerous cult to be a member of, and if you slip up, you can die. And so he was going to be kind of very careful and scared.
This is Jake. And as you can see, I'm very, very sick. If anybody would like to sponsor me, please send money orders to my sponsor at 30 Okay, never mind.
The costuming was very important to creating the mythology of the village while also reflecting our 1970s influences. Mary Widow is in blue and Chloe is in pink, and they both have these empire waistlines, and I made sure Chloe's eyeshadow matched Mary Widow's dress just to reflect that they did belong together. And that kind of trickled down to all the rest of the women. I tried to put them all in these gun sacks 1970s prairie dresses, which took a lot of rummaging through vintage bins in LA and Boston and online. It always gets a little tricky with vintage dresses when there is blood. So particularly with the Nephite characters, the red-haired women, I did have to have two versions, one to destroy and one to do their other scenes in. So their dresses when they're destroyed could be a different day, but basically those were the ones I was going to allow to be ruined. So in the beginning of the attic scene, Elizabeth and Fantine changed their outfits and they put on these sheer gauzy robes. And those robes are a very direct reference to the Jean Rollin films, because he always has the twin sister characters walking along a cliff in this dress. And that's also a turning point in the film where Elizabeth and Fantine are really finding themselves and remembering each other. And it's very ethereal, and there's this ritual, and they're speaking French. I find that this late 1960s makeup styling of the eyelashes and the cat eye liner really looks good on every type of person's face. And I really wanted to make sure that the women in this film just looked absolutely beautiful.
It's kind of more vintagey. We went for like kind of 60s, a lot of cat eyes. We were going for just basic like pre-makeup from very like 60s inspired.
For the men, we really needed to establish that they were part of this cult, this brotherhood, this pack.
It's similar to the way that uniform is treated in secret societies, as well as the way that it's treated in gangs, as well as the way that it's treated in an occupation where everybody is possessing the same uniform. Like it is a symbol of pride for them. It's what very clearly sets them apart from those who are to be victimized.
We were very lucky that one of the vintage stores I go to a lot had just put out a dozen of the same blue jacket. And so I immediately bought them all. And that was really the beginning of creating that look for them.
Right away it's an identifier saying like, I'm with Grando. And obviously with Grando's interpretation of Bathor. And when that, and it's very ceremoniously taken away when it's taken away. There is I think the first person who it's removed from, it's like he has transgressed in some way and shall no longer wear the cloth of Bathor.
We settled on the red tuxedo shirt, which ended up being a huge line budget item because they're very expensive per piece, but really needed it to pull together. And especially when you see Stabitha's character of Wendigo, when she goes into the Church of Bathor, she has a woman's version of that red tuxedo shirt. And you can really tell at that point that she is showing her true colors.
Even when I put that red shirt on, I like felt, you know, it snapped in my head too for acting. Just like, okay, this is when I'm like, this is my time to like really play up this awful character.
For Grando's jacket, we wanted to make sure that it was very obvious that he was the leader. And so we didn't want to put him in the same outfit as the rest of the men. So we were really looking for something to make him stand out. And we ended up finding this vintage red band leader jacket. And it was a very powerful jacket. It had this belt, so he's really buckled in. And you know, he matched the rest of the men, but he stood out. And I think that was really important in the Church of Bathor.
When it came to costume, I remember I actually wrote an email to Sophia saying something, just making broad examples of how willing I was to do whatever. So I was like, I will do this thing in a Speedo. I'll do it in full wool, head to toe. And then she wrote back to me, you'll be wearing wool. And I was like, oh God, I'm actually a little bit allergic to wool. But I didn't want to say anything, so I just let it happen. It was fine.
So for men's wounds, we used like a couple layers of latex and then using a bruise wheel and put it on top of it just to create kind of a lesion type of thing.
The wounds definitely help the character. I've always heard actors talk about the first thing they do is a walk. That wasn't, for me, I looked in the mirror and I knew what I looked like. And so I knew what I had to act like.
We really wanted the audience to immediately identify that the men were corrupt and rotting from the inside. And so we created these sores that were the visual representation of their evil.
So something that ended up being a really central part of Grando's character and the whole feel of the Grando Church and like that side of Bathorism was the rose, and it was like it's symbolic in all these ways, and it's sort of, I can't remember, I feel like it kind of organically evolved / I can't remember if I was instructed that Grando had a kink for the rose, or if it just kind of became that it was the kink and not just like a symbolic thing that he carried around and like rubbed down Jacob's chest right before, Jacob is destroyed or whatnot.
The roses, which ended up being a huge part of the film, weren't originally in the script. They came along because we were searching for a fountain, which we originally wanted the blood fountain to be a humanoid figure to represent Bathor. And as we were searching for fountain, we found this rose fountain, and we thought that that was actually a really beautiful way to represent Bathor.
So as we started adding the rose imagery, we remembered this Japanese film, School of the Holy Beast, and got really excited about the way that they use roses as whips and kind of torture devices, and we decided to incorporate that into Blood of the Tribades.
And it just kind of like, I really can't remember where the line was because nothing about the rose was scripted, or in the actual script I had received at least.
And roses have such a strong history in Gothic literature and visuals. You always see them with a skull. They represent love, they're delicate, they're dangerous, they have thorns. So there's just a lot of great imagery that came up once we had settled on the roses.
It ended up playing this role of its own throughout the whole thing, whether it's being like homoerotically rubbed down the chest of a nude man, pre or mid torture, or later being.
And immediately we're like, all right, now the whips are gonna be rose thorns and the eye is gonna get cut with a rose. And Grando is gonna have this relationship with a rose and rubbing it on people's bodies. And it really tied together a lot of the film.
I don't know, roses are red, blood is red, it was cool. And the thorns are a great way to tear open eyeballs, apparently, so that was great.
I'm going to be doing slight script supervising, some behind the scenes photography, and rose making, I guess.
Rose making.
So we really like doing practical effects as much as possible. But a film like this does end up having a lot of visual effects, a lot of digital effects. And the main reasons are that we have to do things like remove power lines from shots, or remove graffiti, or other things like that, where we don't have full control over the location that we're using. And so we use visual effects to remove elements that we don't want in shots.
We only have this many resources. We have the story we need to tell, the story we want to tell. How can we get it out there? And I think that passion and creativity brings out something special.
Filming in a kitchen with a backdrop with sort of low lighting so that you could then make it feel more like it was on a location later. Seeing it was really convincing.
The room was kind of a mix between, it looked like it was like some kind of a tiny nightclub in the middle of a warehouse mixed with like a school gym. It was weird. And the set was hyper minimal, and it was funny because I can't remember if it was Mike or Sophia or both, but there was like a lot of apologizing about the quality of the set. And I was very not worried about that because it's like I'd seen what they can do with whatever before. They're really good at knowing how to get the shot, even if everything around it is, whatever.
My name is Desiree the Strange. I'm a sideshow performer and magician, and they knew that I did a glass walking bit as part of my show and thought that would be a nice, torture scene to work into their movies. The actual act itself, it's a feast for the senses, let's say it that way. People get really creeped out about seeing, my bare feet walking on the broken glass. And for those of you who are skeptical, yes, it was very, very real. Those are actually my feet. That is actually broken glass. We smashed up some bottles right there on site, so we had some really nice, sharp, fresh pieces. It's not just, a piece of glass sticking up like this and I'm stepping on top of. It's a bunch of different flat surfaces all crisscrossed all over the place. So no particular piece of glass is taking my weight. And in fact, as I'm walking and the glass is breaking, I'm creating more points of contact, and it's getting actually safer. For those of you who are tempted to try it at home, first of all, don't. It is something that, like a lot of my sideshow, it looks very, very dangerous, but if you do it properly, is very safe. But doing it properly is really, really important. The dirty secret behind glass walking is it's not the big pieces of glass that are dangerous. It's the tiny little minuscule pieces that you can't see. And even then, it's not when I'm walking on the glass that it's dangerous. It's when that tiny little piece is on the bottom of my foot and I step off of the glass onto a regular surface, and then that gets wedged in my feet. And so that's not great. Of course, in the movie, when I'm done, we slam my feet down on the glass and have this wonderful effect of the fake blood no, the real blood, of course, no fake blood used. The fake blood kind of spreading from my feet. In reality, as soon as I'm done, I need to bail and sit down on something and brush my feet off to make sure I get all those little glass slivers away. And then, of course, we get the sound. For me, that's most of the experience is actually hearing the glass crunching and breaking. So even if people who decide they can't watch it, they're covering their eyes, they still have to hear it.
Because we're dealing with low budgets, we often don't have access to the exact locations that we need. So a lot of times we end up solving that by compositing shots together, where we take one element from one location and another element from a different location and put them together in a shot to make something that works for the film.
Composite shots are funny because, you know, as the actor, you know, like, oh, well, this guy is supposed to be looking in the window here and he's gonna be creeping on you, and we all know what happens when the men look in the windows.
The incongruities, like that's not there, and those people aren't there. And these two scenes, you know, they get cut together and it looks great, but you'd never know that they weren't shot at the same time. And that's kind of fun movie magic stuff.
So one of the first scenes in the movie is when my character Sava shoots Bathsheba in the bathtub. It was not shot through a window. I was looking directly at the camera outside, and there was no bathtub. That room, I don't know where that room is, but that wasn't the room that was inside the wall that was right next to, and not even close.
Having my head cut off was fun. Yeah, that was actually really cool. I wasn't sure how that was gonna work out, because I get really twitchy when I'm trying to stay still. That's just a thing about me. Like if you tell me to like, okay, hold steady, I immediately just start vibrating.
Pretty much anytime you see the back of the cloaks, it was me and the makeup artist and whoever the third person, if needed, was around. We would just throw them in the cloak, shoot the back, and then later, when we had the actual cast, we were just like, all right, stand kind of in the middle of this bush and deliver your lines. And then, you know, or you're walking down a bridge now, deliver your lines. So it was very silly, but it was very effective. We went to Lucifer Falls in Ithaca, New York to film the waterfall scene, and that waterfall is really awesome because it has a stone step walkway all the way up the side. But it was just me and Michael there. So I had to don the cloak and walk up the waterfall, and in post we had it repeat 3 times so I could represent the Nephites. And if you notice, if you watch closely, I do the same thing with the hood each time, which ended up kind of looking ritualistic, but it was really just because the footage is repeating and there's not 3 people there, it's just me.
I had to shoot at Michael, where you see the arrow fly straight at one of the vampires, and Michael's just shoots fine. And so I had to make sure not to kill him. And I think I did a pretty good job of not killing.
We shot the cross burning at my parents' house in Western New York because we knew nobody would bother us there. And in fact, my dad got really excited to help us burn this thing. He got very childlike with it. And as we were taking it apart and taking off the metal hooks where the people were strung up to, he's like, "What'd you do with this thing? Did you have people tied up to this?" And I was like, "Don't worry about it, Dad. Don't ask too many questions." It was actually really hard to get the cross to actually catch fire because whatever paint Zach had used in building the cross, it was very fire resistant. So we were scoring it and dumping so much lighter fluid and gasoline on it that we actually had to end up slowing down the footage because we didn't have a very long burn.
A lot of the times when you go from the screenplay to the actual film, you end up making a lot of changes. And one of the elements that really underwent a lot of change in that process was the fog. In the original script, that fog was very explicitly made up of the souls of the people who had been killed in the past. As each of the vampires in the film is killed, their soul returns to the fog. It becomes part of that collective. In order to create the fog elements in the film, we used both fog machines and these effects overlays that we purchased that were actual fog or smoke that was filmed. And then we were able to take that and color it and create it and craft it so that it fit with the film.
For the eyeball, we thought that we were going to have to use an animal eyeball, like a cow eyeball. But as vegans, we were really opposed to doing that. So we tried to come up with a different solution. So we got a glass eye and we coated it in layers and layers of very clear silicone that's supposed to mimic water to make a cornea. And to shoot it, we had a very close-up shot of the eyeball, and Mike had the actual rose thorn. We used an actual thorn to do the cutting. Well, I was off to the side with a syringe full of fake blood that as he was cutting the cornea, I was squirting in fake blood, and it looks super gross.
So yeah, I was castrated on film. That was certainly interesting. I remember Mike and Sophia went out and bought a prosthetic penis for me without actually seeing my penis in real life. So I thought that was interesting. I was like, do you guys need me to show you so that you can match, so that you can find one that looks like me? And they were just like, no, we're not going for that like level of accuracy. Like, it's gonna be on screen for like 2 seconds. So I was like, okay. I didn't actually see the penis until I got to set on the day of my nude scene. And there's this photo of me on Facebook that I'll never forget. And it's just me holding the box that it came in, like over my crotch area, as if like, oh hey, like this is mine.
Buying the penis was hilarious because we went to a sex shop where they had very low inventory for the packer, which a packer is used for gender expression. It's not a sex toy, but they only had, the closest they had to what I assumed Hugh would have was a medium-sized kind of tan penis. They didn't have the vanilla color, which I was disappointed in.
Apparently, you know, they come in a variety of sizes, but they were all out of the small sizes, so they had to get like a larger one. They only had the larger ones, and I was like, well, that's flattering, but also I'm worried about continuity. I mean, like, I took an undue level of interest in the continuity of this thing. I'm like, I don't want to give people the wrong idea. I mean, I might have lovers down the line who have seen this film and they're like, hey, buddy, you do not measure up. I didn't get what I thought I was getting, and you need to leave.
So we had this penis that was maybe slightly too big and too dark for Hugh, and we tried to shoot the scene. And in the scene, of course, the penis goes flying through the air and gets stuck to a tree. So as we were shooting this, Zach, I think, threw the penis, and the very first time it got lost in the woods.
So cut was called, and a few of us ventured into the woods to try and find this prosthetic penis. And, you know, we're searching under leaves, under wood, and, you know, on the ground, and it's nowhere to be found. It's, you know, probably like at least like 3 of us searching, and none of us could find it. And sure enough, as we're looking through the woods, we disturb Mother Nature. She doesn't take too kindly to us.
And of course there's like brush everywhere, and there's no way we were ever gonna find it, this tan penis in the brush. But Hugh managed to step on a hornet's nest.
So the hornets just swarm out of it, just like in the cartoons. Swarm out of it, they start stinging all of us, going up our shirts. It's incredibly painful. We just start screaming and yelling out.
I hear Hugh start screaming, and I think, oh no, has he cut himself, or has he broken his ankle, or something bad has happened to him? So I start running into the woods to try to help him, and I see these objects forming all around him, and he starts running toward me, and it took me a second, but I realized that he was surrounded by a swarm of what I thought were bees at the time, but turned out to be yellow jackets, wasps. And he started running toward me, and I had this moment where I thought, do I go in to help him? Is there really anything I can do to fight the wasps off? Probably not. So I ran away.
There was everybody running around. There was a lot of swearing. I realized that I was definitely being stung by a whole bunch of yellow jackets. So I started running towards the front of the house. And then after I thought that I'd made sufficient distance, I stopped running, and it wasn't far enough. And so I started running again.
Zach and I had were covered in wasps and running around the house, tearing off our clothes because they got into our clothes, and I was pulling stingers from my armpits. It was just crazy.
So now I'm in this like on this like suburban street, like taking my clothes off and running around. I wonder what kind of conversations the homeowners had with their neighbors after that one.
You imagine this thing that you see in cartoons where the wasps are flying around everybody's head. Well, this was really what was happening. And they were running around screaming and ripping their clothes off because the wasps had gotten into their clothes. And I felt really bad, and I felt especially bad because the camera wasn't running at that time.
And so someday somebody's dog is going to go walking through there and bring back something, and it's going to make the police reports. Because, yeah, somebody's like, a member was found in the woods.
We had to do pickup shots with a new penis, and I told Sophia, I was like, listen, if they have the smaller version in stock, just get that one for continuity's sake.
I was able to get a smaller, lighter penis for the second penis. And we had a mannequin, and we attached the penis to the mannequin and kind of put the red shirt over it and did a close-up of the chopping motion where it was cut off and being flung. And then later we went out on the coldest day of the year in February to shoot the penis on the tree. And we picked kind of the coldest day because we figured people wouldn't be around. And we went to 3 parks where they were full of kids and were trying to put this bloody penis on a tree. But eventually we found a tree near our house to shoot the penis being stuck into it. So basically we had to put together the sequence from 4 different days, from summer to the coldest day of the year. And the shots just bounced back and forth between what we were able to get on the day with Hugh and what we had to shoot months later.
I'm Sophia Cassiola. I'm in charge. This is mine. These are my things and my people.
So one of the things I really love about the Roland films is that I don't understand French. And so as I watch the film, I hear this fluid, poetic sounding language, and I get to read the words. It's a really different experience than watching an English language film. And I thought it would be really great to create some aspect of that for this film.
She regains her own self-expression by regaining her own language, and it sort of happens in this, kind of almost accidental way. Like she just picks up this book, and it's almost like it triggers a memory.
Because it's hard to visually depict memories returning to characters in a film, we thought having them return to their original language was a really interesting symbolic direct way of depicting that return of memories and return of identity. And we really enjoyed watching the actors shift the way that they performed as they regained the language.
From there, the evolution is really cool because all of a sudden she's taking charge. She's like, oh shit, I know what to do. I remember everything. This is awesome. This is everything that I'd lost is back. And she kind of becomes this a little bit of a driving force in fixing what had gone wrong.
We expect that most of the viewers of the film don't speak French. And so we hope that as they watch that end section of the film and it's delivered in French, it creates a dreamy, ethereal feel and captures some of the aspects of watching those foreign films.
Yeah, it was interesting kind of supervising the French lines on set that day since the directors don't speak French, so they had no idea if Chloe was saying what was written or not.
So nobody spoke French, but all of a sudden I'm rising, and just spitting out these words with all this passion and rage, and they were afterwards they were like, you kind of scared us a little bit. And I realized too that they didn't even know what I was saying.
Vous souhaitez nous jeter dans les temps ardents de feu et de soufre, mais je connais vos secrets.
I'm gonna spit some nonsense at you that sounds like nonsense. It's not. French is a real language. I promise.
Voyageons ensemble dans les ténèbres et sauvons-nous de cette destruction ici sur la terre. Le sang et la vie.
So I did the translating as well, and when I got the script, there was, all the text that I needed to translate in in English, evidently, and I sort of just had to translate my own dialogue in a way. And I realized, you know, sort of being a part of that, how difficult it is also to caption something. You know, it's always a balance. You don't want somebody to read like 5 pages of text on a screen. And some of these old movies, some of these Jean Rollin movies, are the dialogue is really heady and kind of intellectual, and other times that they barely say anything. So that's sort of a funny, you know, which I think is a rhythm that we achieve in this film too.
So we had a rough cut of the film finished, and it ended with Grando screaming as Bathor and the other women attacked him. And then it immediately went to the cross burning in the credits. And it just wasn't working for me.
Je vis un voyageur venu d'une terre antique qui me dit « Vaste et sans tronc ».
And so Sophia had the great idea of showing images of Bathor sort of walking away from the city, leaving in shame.
This poem was added kind of in post-production, so many months later.
Deux jambes de pierre se dressent dans les dunes désertiques.
At first it was like, do you know any good translations of this poem? Because we want to use it, and obviously we want to make sure it's a good translation. And so I was like, oh cool, yeah, I'll dig around for it. And actually I'd known the poem, you know, just as somebody who's a poet, it's very famous, and it's a very beautiful poem that I personally like quite a lot.
Près, un visage brisé, mi-enfoui, sourcils fiers, bouche ridée, froid et autoritaire, se tient stoique.
I remember finding one poem, one translation that was accurate. It was very accurate, but it didn't retain any of the rhythm or very little of the rhythm and very little of the actual rhyme scheme. And then there was another one that had, you know, this great rhyme scheme that matched very well, and the rhythm of it was great, but the actual words were very, very different to me in a way that was a kind of a violation of the original meaning.
Témoignant de cette passion que son sculpteur entendit et inscrivit dans cet objet sans vie, sans voix.
I remember, you know, reporting these findings, and was like, yeah, so here's what's wrong with this translation, here's what's wrong with this one, and I don't remember exactly if I'm the one who suggested it or if they were like, hey, do you want to translate? But essentially what it boiled down to was I wound up doing the translation myself. And that was really, really fun.
Les marquants de sa main et que son cœur a nourri. Et sur le piédestal paraissent ces mots gravés.
This was the first time I was translating an English poem into French, and I was like, all right, this is quite a challenge. But it was very satisfying, and I took great pains to maintain a rhyme scheme. And sort of the rhythm of it. Some lines are maybe a little bit too long, or, you know, there was a little bit of cheating. A little bit, as there always is.
Je me nomme Ozymandias, roi des rois. Admirez mon œuvre ô puissant et tremblez.
But it turned out, in my opinion, to be the best translation of this poem into French. So I don't know, maybe I should submit it to some journals or something.
Rien d'autre ne reste. Autour du déclin de cette colossale ruine, nues et démesurées, lisses et solitaires, les sables s'étendent sans fin.
There's a lot of interesting things going on there in terms of the self-expression, right? Because you have this well-known poem, but you're not experiencing it in a way that you're used to experiencing it, and it's almost as though the language being spoken is the original, but of course it's not, right? It's the other way around.
So I think when a lot of people see the film, they view that poem as a representation of the fall of Grando and Grando's church. But really my intention with it was to look at the fall of Bathor, that there's really no such thing as a great, perfect society, and that even a great leader ultimately will be lost to time.
Aujourd'hui, la promesse d'une harmonie a été brisée. Il y a une épidémie parmi les prêtres de Bathor.
If you were an underling of a bully, you were an underling of a bully so that you were not the next one bullied. So you would do just about anything, including totally undermine or victimize or humiliate your best friend maybe, if the bully was standing right there, because you're a total your heart is a coward and you don't want to be the next victim. And it's actually how power works.
Grando is living in a post-truth reality where facts don't matter. So when the twins present him with Jacob, where he's fully healed and they've used science and facts and research to do it, they are saying, we have the answers to your problems, we can work together, maybe we can live peacefully. But to Grando, that is a huge threat to his power structure and his ideology.
Inevitably, there's going to be moments where we just sort of look at the election and we say, you know, there are some themes in here that we're all going to be reminded of about, you know, how women are being treated and how we treat each other, and about having tolerance for different ideologies. And those are themes that are not going to go away.
A central thing to Grando's character is that he did not ever perform any of his own actions. He didn't get his hands dirty. He didn't torture anybody. He just merely, you'd say strongly suggested, but it's a little more than that if you've seen the film. He asserts that everyone does all of his dirty work for them, and they all do out of some sense of fear because nobody wants to be the person who has the next thing done to them.
So when you break it down into such basic or simplistic acts, the fact that this goes on every day in places to a different degree becomes all the more real.
One of the ideas we really wanted to convey with the film was that even if you create a utopian society, even if there's a great leader, there's always going to be this entropy and chaos. There's always going to be an element of struggle, of people looking for more power and more control. And those people will cause the entire society to break down. And until humanity really changes its motives and its beliefs, we will never see perfection. We'll never see utopia.
Like with the rise of Trump, with the way that not just the Trumpies, but a lot of people were some from the very liberal left were like misogyny started to blossom, and it turned into this thing where what do you know? Suddenly it's about subjugating the woman, and like not for reasons that had much to do with the actual issues that we were trying to elect someone for, but really just the ancient, hateful, I don't like her face, what is that stupid, you know, like just anything you could find to tear this woman down. And it became about elevating masculinity. And I, like probably a lot of people feel this way, but I felt maybe because of Blood of the Tribades so early on that I knew for sure what was going to happen. And I very much hoped, but I kind of knew. And I do think it was sort of because I like sort of stood in the same place metaphorically.
And Bathor shall grant us this victory once more. A victory not only of the present, but a victory of the future. We will cleanse the land of Bathor and prepare for his impending return.
It's like, wow, we couldn't have picked a better time to make this film. We couldn't have picked a more, or at least a more poignant time to make this film.
Content is never as important to me as context. And so the context is really very fleshed out in this movie. And everything happens for a reason, and that reason is making a point. And if there's something you've seen before, there are a lot of things because there's it's a genre tribute, but it's flipped on its head. The context is completely different, and it's supposed to be. And you know, if you're somebody who watched it expecting one thing, and you saw something else instead, and you're wondering why, then the important thing is to think about why.
There we go. Ooh.
So we saw a double feature of Twins of Evil and Daughters of Darkness, and I think at that moment, both Sophia and I decided that we really wanted to try to do something in this sort of lesbian vampire realm. And I was particularly intrigued by Twins of Evil. I loved the idea that there was this sort of religious cult that was attacking women, and that there was this contrast between the sort of evil satanic vampires and the Christianity as a force of oppression against women.
There is a godlike character, Bathor, that we're all worshiping, and then at some point you realize, oh, Bathor actually is in this film, and then there's a huge reveal about who Bathor is, and that Bathor is a goddess and not a god. Ooh, which is, I just felt like was so fitting and perfect for exactly what we were trying to kind of skewer.
I remember when I actually read the script for the first time the whole way through, and I read the final scene with Bathor, I slammed it closed and I was like, yeah! And I was so excited.
I always loved the idea of, making some God or Christ figure of some sort, making them female color. I mean, I think if there is one, that should just be the case anyways, because let's see some heads explode.
You're expecting this person, you're expecting this white guy, you're expecting this like another Grando, you're expecting this. And then, she pops off her hood and she's this beautiful black woman. And you're like, wow, that's wonderful.
God could be a mutated dog with dozens of genitals. God could be like a toaster that's like sentient and can read minds. Like, he could be Elvis. There's a lot of people who think that, and things that are inherently beyond our comprehension are probably going to be not what we think that they are, right?
And there have been a lot of other things, definitely culturally, that have talked about how the goddess has been removed from religions where there was a god and a goddess, or where the goddess has become a god as a way to continue to subjugate women and keep them out of the picture of divinity. Whereas in a lot of cultures that's really central to divinity. Like in Hinduism, there is the male and female sides of the god Ardhanarishvari, which is Shiva and Shakti, or Shiva and Parvati, and like they together form this union. And then when that aspects of that and other ancient religions were taken forward, at some point the goddess is scooped out, or the goddess becomes Mary, mother of the god, and kind of moved off to the side a little bit. Or maybe Mary Magdalene, who then also becomes a prostitute, so again moved off to the side and kind of subjugated and pushed down.
So much of religion is basically like a game of telephone, which, as you see here, 2,000 years of a game of what happens if you play the game of telephone for 2,000 years is kind of, you forget your language, you forget your voice, and I thought that was probably the most powerful.
I really resonated with the Grando Bathor cult because I was raised Mormon.
We have accomplished many great deeds in the name of Lord Bathor to repay our sins.
I feel like the movie was saying some stuff about belief and faith and the things that we do that drive us into our behaviors, and kind of like the absurdity of the rules we live by in society, which, like, I don't know, that just means a lot to me. And like, even after leaving the cult that I was born into, I still feel, a strong kind of like unreasoning faith in things. And I feel like there's some kind of weird programming core in our backs of our brains that we have that tells us to believe in something bigger than ourselves, even if it's completely absurd. And it was really fun to play with that in this movie.
And I had some early pretty negative experiences in my life with evangelical Christianity, and this felt where there was something beautiful that was taken and continuously corrupted into something that was less and less beautiful, and more about control, and more about subjugation, and more about patriarchal hierarchy structure.
For people, the blood is the life!
That is really, in a lot of ways, what the film is. It's this whole time, there's this religious zealot, this guy, and his followers who are sort of compelled / forced to believe, accept this bastardized form of the true religion, the original words of Bathor, where the goddess, which we don't find out about until the very end of the film, has been subjugated and has basically been, it's almost like Grando has just drawn a male face right over the female face of the goddess and said, nope, see, this is what he wants.
You are not Lord Bathor. You cannot be.
And there's so much anger and bitterness in it, and it has to do with it's just the classic that's been in all religion. It's like women can create life. Men seem to mostly be really good at destroying life. Obviously, they have a hand in the creation of life, but they are not the bearers of the womb. So feeling that inadequacy, they have to press down any aspect of matriarchy, any aspect of the goddess, any aspect of female divinity. and just like eradicate it in any way they can and raise up this false aspect of themselves, basically, to worship that.
If you want to follow religious teachings because it helps you lead a better or more fulfilled life, that's great. But if you want to follow religious teachings and then use them to exploit or abuse or control or oppress people, then I have a problem with that.
It really exists. There are churches all over America that you'll see very shockingly similar speeches. Even parts that were made up entirely for this film to be ridiculous are so close to a lot of what's happening in this country, and I think that we can really see that now. More maybe than any of us really knew that we would.
We're cultists, and our belief in our sameness unites us, and none of us is really actually the same as each other in real life, but religion and belief is one of the aspects of life that pushes us to try and be more like each other, and that kind of causes fear because it's never natural.
And I actually felt, for me, I felt sort of like, well, this is something I kind of have to do because I have the opportunity and I want to be a responsible human being. And so to help tell this story, to help, again, present what has been done, what is continuously being done, what's always done whenever religion comes up, whenever religion, there's something beautiful, there's something, and it's corrupted into something that ends up being about power.
X marks the spot.
My major goal as a filmmaker is to always include interesting roles for women. I see a lot of films where the women are the hot girlfriend or the mom to some male character, and they don't have anything to do with the story. They're just set dressing. And I think it's really important for women to see each other in roles where we do have something to do with the story and we do move plot forward.
You know, as much as I love these old films, and as much as I know the directors do too, there are certain elements that can be frustrating at times, where like, it is very common that you see women being hurt and tortured and violence committed on them, and then, never the other way around, right? And the women are always naked all the time, and the men are never naked either, and so there's, I know that it was important to them, and this is one of the things that I liked about the project a lot too, is to kind of flip that script a little.
The trials and tribulations of Tribades happens, like it's reflected in our current day society, and all of these patriarchal standards, and how these men in this society are so, like, got their claws into this idea that women just can't be themselves. They can't just exist and want to have sexual desires and want to have their own lives.
When you look at what religion and patriarchy has done to women and femininity and women's sexuality, it's vulgar.
This is the traditionally patriarchal kind of male power hierarchy. This is what it was.
The men are the ones being tortured and hurt because of their own institution, which I think is true in real life. Like the patriarchy, it doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men too.
Men want women because we're beautiful and because we help procreate and carry their genetics on. We also are sexually desirable, and we've dealt with centuries upon centuries of men taking that and instead of celebrating it, killing it.
The men are literally killing these women, whereas the women just kind of want to be like, sorry dude, leave me alone please. And I can't help but feel like that all the time, even just walking down the street.
As little girls, you get raised to be a certain way, and magazines tell you a certain thing, and movies and TV and music tell you a certain thing about what it means to be a woman, and everything you do is in this filter of sort of this Cosmo magazine, like how to get a man, how to not be fat, how to not be ugly, how to do all of these things for a man, get a man, get a man, get a man.
He has an opportunity to become that ally and that person to just be transformative and to bring those good values back to the people that he considers his comrades. And yeah, they don't take too kindly to it.
I think by having it be a female character who has betrayed the main characters is a little worse, you know? We expect the men to exploit and torture the women, but when it's another woman that sells you out, that's a betrayal.
So you see these old source movies, this old source material that have these fun instances of a kind of a weird, almost cartoonish violence, but then every once in a while it goes too far and there's this something really unsettling and you're just like, oh, this is like upsetting as a woman.
I think the 70s was a really transgressive time in film worldwide, especially in Europe, partially in the US, but I feel like you got the really insane stuff coming out of Europe. And I think when you watch transgressive films, there's an excitement to it, but so often you can't divorce it from the moment in time, and there's a real macho, sometimes, not just sometimes, very often aggressive, angry treatment of women.
She drugs me, puts me on the X, and then whips me with the tool of the patriarchy itself, the thorns. And her character is one of those women who you would see on social media being like, I'm not like girls, I hate girls, all my friends are guys. And I'm like, I'm really sad for you.
There was a scene that was cut from the movie, and cut so early on that we didn't shoot it or anything, where my character gets tortured in a flashback. There already was the Merry Widow torture scene, and they didn't want to add another one where like a woman was vulnerable and naked and like being hurt.
The source material is very sensual almost. You know, it's very kind of, but in a male gazy sort of way, like, you know, this heavy, quote, lesbian, you know, themes, but it's really for a male audience.
In a way, the male gaze is can be sort of ridiculous at times, right? Not ridiculous when it becomes violent, but it can become ridiculous when it's just so obvious and so blatant that this is like, you didn't even think about this, right? You're just blatantly, you know, giving into like, I want to see hot ladies, you know? So that fun spirit is in the film as well, but there's also a very romantic spirit, and I appreciate that a lot about it. I like that a lot of the interactions between my character and Merry Widow's is that they're just kind of, you know, they're like longing for each other. It's very sweet.
In Blood of the Tribades, you have that transgressive feeling. You feel like you're watching something like, can you do that in a movie? And taking a lot of those reference points with a modern sensibility and modern understanding of gender politics.
It is sort of almost rewriting that history and being like, yeah, here's the movie, this sort of movie if it had been made now.
There's more to be gained from cooperating. There's more to be gained from working together than there is by us being divided. And that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind as you watch the movie.
I feel silly to say because, you know, this is our 70s naked lesbian vampire movie, but I do hope that more art comes out that reinforces strong women.
Cumulative effect of many stories being told that shift that perspective, and people might watch it and not know that it doesn't agree with their worldview. And that's how we change people's minds.
I don't know.
This is so great. All the 1970s vampire films that we were sort of emulating included a lot of nudity. And so it was important to us to recognize that and to make sure that our nudity was a part of the story and a part of the commentary that we were trying to make with the film.
They're lesbian vampire movies, but they're very clearly not made with lesbians in mind. And they're not made for lesbians. They're made for men. They're very much about seeing beautiful women naked touching each other. So seeing that as an adolescent who is realizing that I also liked seeing beautiful women touching each other, but also that I am a woman, so I'm like, oh, but this is weird thing where it can be difficult sometimes to articulate your own desire versus what you perceive to be the male gaze when you are queer yourself.
For the women's nudity, they're all portrayed in their own spaces or with their friends or alone, just going about their normal business. And when the men come along and see that, they're so threatened by the female body in front of them that it's so tempting or revolting to them that they have to destroy it.
Because the film has so much nudity in it, we worked really, really hard to choose a cast and crew who would be really respectful of the actors who were doing the nude scenes. That was one of the most important things to us, to create an environment on set that was comfortable and safe for everybody involved.
This is the first time I've actually done nudity in a film. And I've been asked to do nudity in films before, and I had said no. But specifically for this project, I knew why the nudity was important.
And I suppose that a lot of burlesque performance has gotten me to that point where I'm sort of okay with that, and it just seems like the tiniest next step, but I was glad I did it, and it didn't seem like as big a deal as I thought it was going to be.
I feel like I talked to people about the project, and they're like, oh man, it's like so racy and wild. And I'm like, you know what, we're naked, but it's sort of a weird, innocent nakedness for like most of the movie.
I was asked, are you okay with being nude in a film? And I was like, yeah, sure, fine.
The nudity aspect of the film actually didn't really cross my mind, because at that point, I, as a mom, pulled out my boobs so many times a day in so many different contexts. It's more like a drinking cup than a part of your body.
I wasn't purely interested in the role because of the nudity, but the fact that that was there, it was kind of a hook for me.
I don't know if I would have felt the same way being gratuitous nudity for the sake of being gratuitous nudity. Nudity kind of has to have a point. I like satire, and I felt this was so cheekily aware.
I'd been naked in like other things before, so it was like it wasn't like hard the second time, no pun intended.
I really wanted a cameo in the film because I love the lesbian vampire genre so much, but since I was shooting and directing, that made it kind of difficult. So Michael and I went through the script and we settled on me playing Bathsheba because she was only in one scene. And I also really liked that there was nudity in the scene because I wanted to show the actors that I was willing to do something that I was asking a lot of them to do, and that it was important to the story to have nudity, and for me to kind of set the tone with that.
I am a filmmaker myself, and I know that I will ask people to be nude in future films, most likely, and I wanted to know what it felt like to be on the other side of that equation. I think that's only fair that if you ask other people to do that you also know what it feels like.
You need to physically take the clothes off, and then once they're off, I had this robe that I was going to wear like in between takes, and I just didn't wear it because I was like, whatever, like it's fine. Everybody's seen everything at this point. You don't care, at a certain point.
The thought just dawned on me that, oh my God, this is a 4K camera that we're shooting on. It's going to be a close-up, and it's going to be shown on the big screen. It's going to be preserved for all time in this film. I need to make sure that it looks the best that it possibly can.
The on-set experience during the nude scenes was very good. I had just met Seth and Zach, and I'm just laying there completely naked with my merkin on and my boobs out and blood everywhere, and I was just like, hey guys, nice to meet you. But it wasn't in any way awkward at all.
The politics of breastfeeding are very interesting, and I'm lucky to live in a place where that kind of politics isn't talked about too much because it's sort of just a given. Although, it was interesting telling her grandmother, my mom, who is from the Midwest and pretty conservative, that I was half naked in a movie and breastfeeding my daughter. But I really didn't give that part of it a second thought. The thought that her dad and I talked about a little bit more was the fact that she was going to die in a movie, which we thought was more political than the breastfeeding part.
Right.
So prior to the shoot, I was actually pretty excited about doing nudity as something new and exciting for me. On the day of the shoot, though, I was pretty petrified. And in fact, I became very self-conscious because I realized that I hadn't done any manscaping in a while.
You know, they were respectful of like, okay, we're gonna do this now, like, are you ready? And we were like, yep, great.
Like, well, this isn't just me doing this, this is a lot of people seeing me naked, and we're all very insecure about a lot of different things, and it was good to just confront that, and even if it meant, like, you know, being hit with roses and just being violently assaulted while naked, you stop thinking about it after a couple of minutes.
So we're in somebody's backyard in this location that we've secured, and it's my first ever time shooting a nude scene. So as a courtesy, the production team sent out emails to the neighbors saying, hey, we're doing some shooting in this backyard, and also there's going to be some nudity, so please stay inside if you don't want to see that. And sure enough, it's like 3 or 4 takes into when I'm first dropping trowel, and lo and behold, there is the neighbor's kids that come out to play. And there's just a little opening in the bushes between this yard and their yard, providing a direct line of sight. And I was thinking, like, guys, you know, I love you, but I'm not going to jail over an indie film. I'm not. I know you paid me, but it's not nearly enough.
And it was a very small and intimate set too, so I don't know, I can't imagine how that must feel on like a huge, major movie where you have like 50 people, you know, so small and intimate, and that was sort of nice.
I wasn't exactly sure what the protocol was for looking at people while they were shooting their nude scenes. I mean, on the one hand, I want to be respectful of their privacy, but on the other hand, they're actually giving up their privacy and putting their naked bodies on film, and we're all going to see it later anyway. So it's just this weird sort of like gray area of like socially acceptableness where I didn't know what to do, and I just habitually turned away. And I think probably somebody at one point was like, well, why are you doing that?
And I was in the room for a couple of the male nudity shots as well, and just the vibe of the room when those were occurring. You know, there was a lot of people in the room when there was the few male shots that I was there for, and also that was the day where I was on the cross, so I was topless. Nobody made any jokes. Nobody was creepily staring, you know, and some of these people in the room were strangers to me at that point.
It was also important for me on a personal level to do the nudity because I'd gone through a long period with my back where I couldn't really function, and I was laying on the floor and I had a lot of pain, and I eventually had to have surgery. And the scene was shot not too really long after that, and so it was nice for me to have that opportunity to show my body in a way that was positive and kind of reclaim it in a way. And I was also really happy that the scar made it into the film.
I do think as a kid I was a little bit more shy. Like I wouldn't even wear V-necks, you know. I was a little shy, and I think that was just had to do with my own like feeling about my body and my own insecurity about just within myself. You know, I had a lot of things that I was insecure about. And so it was kind of a fun thing, you know, to just sort of literally shed every layer and be like, little teenage me would have been like so aghast at this, but not for any real reason, just because she was kind of shy. And, sort of insecure, and there's something sort of liberating about letting it all off, it's kind of fun.
Basically, all my shit is like being seen in like Transylvania and England and stuff like that. So I feel like I joke to people all the time. It's like, yeah, I feel like I'm going on a world tour flashing people. So we started laughing about it.
In fact, my mom this was a big moral question for her. This was a big existential choice. Do I see my son, who I gave birth to, by the way, do I see his penis in a violent movie? And she used the excuse of, oh, it's a violent movie and I don't like violence, as that was her excuse, but that's not the real reason.
My mother actually saw that scene. You sent some trailer that was the original one or something. I didn't know that they were gonna show me my dong out and everything. But when it came up, my mother saw it. My mother didn't even flinch. She just saw it and was just like, oh, that's interesting. Women are making out with each other. She's just like.
I do like the ladies, not just in the movies. And I was slightly worried for myself. I was like, am I gonna get turned on during this? And I'm a professional. I'm a consummate professional.
I have a lot of friends who are very much, oh, you did this horror film, and the only way I'm gonna get them to watch is oh, there's a lot of nudity in it, so, so there is that market for it, but they're gonna end up seeing something that they did not expect, which is something I love.
The female nudity in the movie is not exploitative, where the male nudity in the movie, I think, is very intentionally, we have very long lingering shots on penises just so that the audience will be like, are you seeing it?
I think male nudity is great, not only in relieving the disproportionate pressure that we put on women to appear nude as actors, but also in just giving some fan service to people who like to see men naked. I mean, for Christ's sake, where's their piece of the pie? Where's their action?
Yeah, there should have been, more erections. But actually, no, more erections. That would have been completely out of character with the film, because these guys were flaccid motherfuckers.
When I first saw the fake trailer, when I was watching it, I was like, oh, there's a penis. That's really interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen a flaccid penis on screen before. And then as I was thinking that, another penis showed up and I was like, oh my goodness, why am I feeling so shocked right now? Is it because I never see penises? And then as I was going through that process, there was another penis that came on screen and I was like, oh, this is so wild. I can't believe that I have gone through all of the films that I have seen, and I have seen countless breasts, and never have I seen a flaccid penis before. And it was just so interesting to watch that and to kind of be like, even though this is such a weird little thing, it's just one step closer to equality.
Everything we see on television and movies, there's always tons of female nudity and there's never any hanging of dong.
It's always important to me to show a lot of nudity in non-sexual situations, because I think most nude situations in life are non-sexual. And especially with the male nudity, where we never see a penis in media, I think it gives it a lot of power and it makes it very taboo. And so to show so many penises in this film, it's a way of desensitizing people, and trying to normalize it is just a part of the body and take away some of that power that it has.
It's got a naked guys in it. It's not just a fact of it. It's clearly very intentional.
On the topic of nudity, I would say that it is rare and rewarding even to work on a film where the nudity actually serves a purpose. I would say in many horror films, nudity does not serve a purpose. It's just sort of thrown in willy-nilly because, that's the genre.
So it's got so many things packed into it. It's the humiliation of just being stripped nude. It's the humiliation of being deprived of the cloth of Bathor. So even as you're sitting there, before you know what your fate is going to be, you know that you are now outcast.
It was cool to see a lot more men naked than women, even though, women are beautiful naked, and there is that in this movie, and it's beautiful and great, but it's so cool to see the amount of men that you get to see. You're like, oh, all right.
So I was kind of thinking of my mom with a lot of the male nudity and how proud she would be.
It was banned in Japan, you know what I mean? I was telling some people, I was like, dude, it was I'm totally in a movie that got banned in Japan, it's pretty dope. And then people were like, wait, what? Why is it banned in Japan?
It's really thoughtful in the way that in traditionally in horror film, in all media really, women have been shown nude for both sexual gratification, but also for vulnerability, to really underline as like, oh, this is this vulnerable naked woman.
No one would be surprised in the movie if, Grando had the two guys get Fantine and put her on the cross. If Grando had her on the cross and the two guys were going to be whipping her, she'd be facing front so that you could see her boobs and she would be totally naked, and it would be a normal horror movie where it'd be like, here's this lady, she's naked, now we're going to torture her. Enjoy your gross boners, everyone.
Captured, stripped naked, shown in total vulnerability, and then just beaten and strangled and all that. And I feel like as someone who's primarily a burlesque performer, and that is primarily a female art form, I know that there are a lot of things that come up pretty frequently in terms of equality and what people have the right to say and what people have the right to do, and what makes sense. And I feel like there's a lot of power dynamic that is referred to in terms of how men take off their clothes versus how women take off their clothes.
What would have been done to a woman, we did to a man. So in the case of Dale Stones, who's playing Jacob, literally he's stripped. He's immediately stripped right down. He's already not wearing the cloth, but he feels safe and protected because he's been sent on a mission. He's returning from the mission. What he feels is successfully with great news, forgetting that any news that isn't the news that Grando wanted is not good news.
Being the one focal point of that role reversal in classic 70s vampire film as a genre, and having my character be the one, having Jacob be the one that is being tortured, is being violently, like the clothing torn off. That's definitely something that I think resonates for me, and I was really glad, especially as a burlesque performer, to be able to tell that part of the story and say, this is something where if we're going to dramatically sexualize something, we're going to do something that is not the expected, not the norm, and make it be a character that would normally have power in this situation and now doesn't.
And so one of the things it seems like the cultists are doing is feminizing the men. Maybe not feminizing them, but definitely subjecting them to the same thing that we as a society subject women to, where it's normal to have a scene where you strip down a woman and humiliate her, or even if you don't humiliate her, the idea is vulnerability, and the vulnerability is supposed to be very feminine.
Actually, being there, seeing the scene filmed where Dale was being tortured on Bathor's Red X there, and seeing him naked, in front of me like that, and seeing that, realizing the exposure and how, again, vulnerable it was making the male characters, it was really eye-opening.
Having that feeling of being on set and being like, well, this is fucked up, and there are probably so many more situations where any female counterpart would have that same reaction in so many myriad ways, that it was definitely something that I felt really connected to as a learning experience, and also as a way to demonstrate that for others. That felt really good.
I think showing the males vulnerable like that really helps the audience understand how often that trope is used in the rest of media. It just kind of underlines it and says, hey, if you're uncomfortable watching this, why is that okay? Or if you're not uncomfortable watching this, why is that not okay? Any media, any art that asks questions, I think, asks more questions than answers, I think is worth spending your time on.
The nudity in this film is so intentional. Comically so on the male side, and sort of philosophically so on the female side.
It's because there's a meaning to it in this one that I don't know that there was in the original one. It's just I feel like in the 70s movies it's like, are you willing? It's like, yeah, okay, then take your clothes off. But in this, it had to be this way.
How can she continue to expose herself to that innocent child?
She's vile and dishonors Bathor. Only of Bathor's blood shall we drink.
There is the scene in the attic where Fantine and Elizabeth do their ritual. They've remembered who they are, they remember their relationship, they remember their past and their power, and through this sexual ritual, they regain their power. And for me, personally, that's kind of everything I believe in as a human. One of my missions in life as a performer and as a woman and, even as a person off stage is to empower everyone, but especially women, to find who they are and be comfortable with their sexuality and reclaim that magic.
There was one little moment where I was like, this is very erotic, and it's the actual moment where she takes off my robe. And I realized I think there's something really nice about that moment because it's so intimate. There's something about taking, just the act of taking the clothes off, not the nudity itself, but taking the clothes off, that's really very intimate. And I think for me, looking at that moment in the film and the whole thing, it's this very intimate, beautiful moment. And of course, everybody's, asking more like, oh, was the makeout scene hot? And it's like, it was fun. It's always fun to make out. But for me, that was the actual hottest moment.
That also maybe was kind of a dream come true scene for me. When you get told you're going to be in a lesbian vampire movie, that's kind of the pinnacle. Having your bloody makeout scene. It's everything a girl could want.
We've had all this tension, all this sexual tension, and sort of explodes into this wonderful, gory, blood everywhere, just long kiss. The kiss itself was very long. And so people, I guess one of the more common questions I get was like, well, was that fun? Was it great? I was like, it was fun, but also let me tell you, kind of difficult to make out with someone when you have a mouthful of fake blood. First of all, it didn't taste great, if I may say so, because it's basically just corn syrup. So it's like I had all this sugar in my mouth. I was like in my head I remember being like, I hope this looks hot because this is really awkward for me right now. Just blood spilling everywhere.
I've had a lot of experience with this, actually, in my years as a horror burlesque performer. I am used to having blood in my mouth. An act that I do involves me having a huge thing of blood in my mouth and then letting it all come out. So I was coaching Chloe through how to do that without gagging.
Mary Widow was like, yeah, let's do it. And she was pumped and everything. And just and I was just kind of trying to keep up a little bit. It's like, oh man, I hope this translates well to the camera because this is quite a funny thing.
So I was very confident in my blood makeout technique and was happy to be support for her and a coach for her. And I know that Mike and Sophia were silently barfing behind the scenes.
The other thing too is that, so we had these fake teeth. And mine, during the making out, one of them kept coming out. So at this moment I was like, we have to stop. My tooth is in my mouth, and so I had to pop it back in and.
You're like, nope.
There is definitely a very homoerotic component to the way that Grando and his disciples interact. There's sort of like a brotherly romance, if you will, between the two main henchmen. It seems like there's this kind of that's going on, and then there are some looks that are given by the henchmen to the leader that definitely feel almost like they're trying to please the forever unattainable father figure, but also there's this undertone of wanting to gratify the leader in some way.
How it very much so resembles the locker room dynamic of the whole I'm not gay, you're gay sort of thing, and in the way it's also pretty funny to have that dynamic with the women and have the women be the equivalent of they have cooties, we need to kill them, and then you have the guys who are pretty much we're the best, and oh man, just evokes so many awful feelings of just high school and those social expectations that were just miserable.
The relationship between Grando and the other men, and especially as I tried to put between Berwick and Saba, was really this kind of repressed, kind of homosexual urges. And I like to think of Berwick and Saba as kind of having a not-so-secret bromance throughout the whole thing, because we spend a lot of time just kind of hanging out together.
the scene that ended up being totally on the spot, improvised, when Zach and I, with our crossbows pointing up, and then we're looking at each other, we're nodding, and in my head, like that, watching it, forgetting that I'm a part of it, watching that scene, I always imagine that our foreheads are going to touch.
Kind of chance shots that we got that I think ended up being really one of my favorite shots in the movie is the sunset with me and Chris holding the crossbows and like staring off into the distance. You know, it's this really kind of weirdly like erotic shot, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
You know, then also there's something very phallic about the crossbows sticking straight up between us, and you know, I wouldn't doubt that there's a sexual component to our character's devotion to Grando.
We're all, you know, men, and we all stand for one thing, and you know, if you're in our group, then you have to behave a certain way, and then so it makes it all the more confusing that they take so much joy in like tearing each other's clothes off and torturing them where they see as, you know, as dissidents to any slight infraction, and have these weirdly perverse ideals about what constitutes falling in line.
I didn't know that that I was gonna get like have a bunch of guys rip my clothes off, but I don't know. I thought it was kind of hot actually. Like, you know, yeah, throw me up on the thing and let me, you know, I kind of enjoyed it.
One scene in particular where I remember Mike literally shouting a couple times from off screen, "Amp up the homoeroticism!" And so I just tried to do that as best I could, which also was like not that hard, because it's a component of that stereotypically male hierarchical power structure. It really is also a component of that. It's if you are a man and you grew up in this country and probably a lot of places in the world, and you used a locker room at any point in your life, you know that there are some weird. You think of the trope in a lot of sort of silly films or these coming-of-age films of like slap-assing each other with a wet towel and all of this stuff that is like not sexual.
And especially in a movie that's got a lot of peen in it, I'd say the subtext is pretty textual.
And of course, you know, Grando, the biggest closeted character in the movie, and his need to, you know, demonstrate his superiority, and then having these moments of I guess hidden lust, and you know, using the rose to like trace my body, and I'm like, this is really seductive, but I know he doesn't mean it, but maybe he does, but now I'm dead. And struggling with that was, as he did, I think he did a really great job showing that, and then showing that disgust and that self.
Is he sniffing the rose because he likes to smell the rose? Or is he literally like sniffing the Jacob off of the rose? Because, and I can't remember where sequentially it happens, but I definitely felt like, I think it's both.
Look away and close your eyes tight.
We wanted the score for Blood of the Tribades to be really in line with the lesbian vampire films that we were inspired by, and especially the Hammer films that had more of an orchestral feel to them. And so we looked at creating motifs and themes that fit the different elements of the film.
A little dark, a little melancholy, a little sad, but also strong in terms of like certain characters, and dramatic, dark and dramatic.
We didn't have access to a string quartet or an orchestra, so we were just sitting at a computer using a keyboard controller, and mostly Catherine was playing different parts as I sort of worked with her to come up with different ideas and to think about what motifs should recur, and we just played through each scene. We would watch it on the screen and play along and layer tracks until we had something that we felt like really worked for the film.
As far as instrumentation, the things that were added, which were different, which were kind of fun, were French horns, there were violins, there were cellos, there was a lot of things that we worked together to create a sonic, lush background to what visually was happening.
The only instrument that wasn't just a sample played on the computer was the acoustic guitar, and Catherine played a lot of the really nice, beautiful acoustic guitar parts.
During the course of when the filming started and when we actually started working on the soundtrack, I actually purchased a nylon string Cordoba guitar, which Michael said, oh, maybe we can use that. Each note you play on that has to be exact, and you put your own feeling in it. Each note has to resonate a certain way, and so that was kind of a cool way, I thought, to accent certain feelings.
We tried to use the music to reinforce some of the subtler aspects of the film. One aspect in particular that I thought was pretty fun was that the Church of Bathor music, the music that played in the background of whenever Grando is talking, also recurs when the women are having their meetings. We wanted to show parallels between the leaders of the women and the leaders of the men.
Repetitious, but moving, and not really repeating, but kind of sounds like it's repeating. So that was kind of always the challenge. And this one scene, we just sat down and started going, and Mike was like, okay, let's go. And he's kind of directed like where there were supposed to be certain things, but it all happened one take. Watching, and I hit like the certain action things, like it was like really, I was happy that we didn't have to redo anything over that, but then after I did it, it was like, okay, now we're gonna add things on top. And I was like, okay, great, because I just kind of went with certain chordal motifs that we did do earlier, but there were some things that were slightly different, so I had to go back and listen to make sure that I was hitting the right things at the right times.
I worked with Catherine a little bit on her Bring Us Your Women project, and when I first heard the song Triste from that project, I immediately fell in love with it and said right away, I'm gonna put this in whatever film I make next. And it worked out really well for Blood of the Tribades because there is this whole French element and this theme of sadness, especially with the lyrics in French, just fit perfectly.
Ô déesse des ténèbres, mère des immortels, que je renaisse et devienne ton enfant, que ta lumière absorbe la mienne.
It was like a progressive rock piece, I guess, in terms of how it progressed from this kind of melancholy, sensual blood ceremony to this craziness. It built up to this craziness at the end, and it did. We brought in the crazy organ sounds at the end. It got more chaotic. There was like rhythmic things happening, you know, against what the melody was doing. So I think it built up to this like whole craziness at the end, and then it just exploded. But that was like the longest. It was really, really long piece of music to write for, a scene to write to that had constant music underneath that accented every part of what the dialogue was and what was happening at the time. This film with the themes that were present in the story, as well as the orchestration that was used to make the score, to be recognized and to have people comment on it, I think for me is very fulfilling, and it's a great honor to have people not just be like, oh yeah, there was music, I think.
Hello, I'm Christy Lynn, also known as Zombie Romance. I'm an illustrator, and I created the poster art for the Blood of the Tribades movie.
For the poster, we knew we wanted to work with Christy Lynn because she does beautiful portraiture of especially women. And we'd worked with her before. She worked on the dream sequences for our previous film and did a postcard for us for our film before that. So we knew we had a good working relationship with Christy Lynn. And So we brought her in very early and we showed her some of what we shot. And initially we'd only shot the attic scene with the candelabras and Mary Widow and Chloe together. So she kind of started with that and did some great sketches.
I used watercolor and acrylic, high flow acrylic that acts like watercolor, and white gouache, kind of a mixture of all the mediums. Something that one of my favorite poster artists, Drew Struzan, does is he uses any materials that he can get his hands on that help him sort of go through the process. So that's what I did as well.
And then we're like, okay, so we also need to show Grando, because Grando is the main guy. And so we had her add that. And then later, like, all right, now we definitely need the cross in there because that's just cool. We're gonna light it on fire. It's gonna be this big thing. Get the cross in there. And so just kept throwing these different elements at her. And then later, we saw in the shooting, so we were working with her throughout the shooting, we saw in the shooting how big of a character that Guilty Nay was gonna be that we didn't even quite know from the script alone. It was really Cindy's playing of Guilty Nay. It was just this tough as nails vampire kicking so much butt that we were like, all right, now we gotta get Cindy on the poster. And then later, we're like, all right, Bathor really needs to be on the poster, but obviously we can't show Bathor, so can you also like hide in there like a figure in a cloak?
So I was really delighted when they asked me to make a poster for this film because I love lesbian vampire movies from the 70s, and I've always wanted to make a grindhouse horror movie poster, but felt like I missed my time because I was born in the 80s. I drew a lot of inspiration from posters of Jean Rollin movies. I looked at some Hammer movies and just in general horror movie posters from the 60s and 70s. There's a lot of illustration, hand-painted stuff, a lot of really bold graphic designs.
And we basically had like 12 things that were like, Christy Lynn, jam all this stuff into the poster. And she did. And it came out really, really great.
Sort of like, I think you forget every time this isn't like this summer camp that's gonna last forever and then we'll all be doing this fun thing forever. Like it's somehow you forget every time. You get swept up and you forget. And then it's over and you're done and you're going home. And this film, and the term was ghost in a snow globe. That's what I felt like. When you're done, you're like that character you played, that person you became is this ghost that's forever trapped in this little snow globe universe. You didn't make the snow globe. You have no control over what else is in there. You're not even going to be the one who shakes it up eventually and watches all little things come down.
Seeing the finished product, seeing how it all came together and what aspects of, you know, the Jean Rollin stuff or the Hammer stuff or just Mike and Sophia's, you know, weird universe stuff all coming together was really special and really nice. And I'm very proud of the movie. And I tell people, it's very European and it's very naked and it's very weird and I hope you love it.
Now, a lot of actors will say, well, I don't watch the work that I do. I can't watch the films that I'm in. And I always feel like, man, that's really too bad. What a huge loss that is for you because as that kid who used to, you know, pull faces in the mirror and, you know, to play little imaginary games with myself or whatnot, a lot of like why I love to be in movies is because I like to later watch those movies, and if I'm in the film, then that means I can make one part of it exactly the way that I'd want it to be, and then watch that later and have that satisfaction of being like, yeah, that's just what I want to see, cool, because I can actually forget that it's me in a way too.
The first day that we shot was this really, really long day. I don't remember how many hours exactly, but it was long. It was like maybe 18 hours, something like that. It was this climactic scene where I yell at everybody in French, and Mary Widow and I have this romantic moment and everything. So it was just all that happened on the first day of shooting, and it was a lot of fun, but it was kind of intense, and we were all sort of very tired by the end of it, you know. And so it was this weird sort of surreal moment where you're like, oh, well, that's done. I wonder what it looks like. And to actually see it was really cool. It was really satisfying.
When I walked into the studio for filming, it's like, oh, I knew this was going to be low budget, but okay, all right, but I trust Michael and Sophia, so it's going to be okay. But it really, it was very, very shocking from what I was there filming on the day of, because I remember telling my wife when I got home, I was like, I don't know what this is going to look like. It's just basically, this room, and we're kind of doing all these fight scenes. At first, I honestly thought, okay, we're going to do the fight scenes here. This is the rehearsal space, and the real set's got to be somewhere else. But I was so happy to be wrong. I mean, when I saw the final film, just the way they controlled the lighting and where the focal point of the camera was, and all other terms that I'm going to pretend I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. And it looked great.
I knew doing this movie was going to be great, but then you see it and you're like, wow, this is amazing. Like it's going to go places. It's a great movie. It's beautifully shot. Everybody's wonderful in it. The acting's like phenomenal. So I think it's definitely different, because in my head, you're in this little space and you're like, oh, how are they going to make this look like, this like awesome kingdom? And somehow it does.
There's something about this film that just plays to, it was like a birthday present from the universe to be able to do this, because it plays to all of these little things that I love so much about so many other little things. And then to see, and as an actor, having been through this thing where you see the final product and it's never what you think it's going to be. It's always very different. The director had a different vision, or part of your favorite scene was cut or whatever. This was like better than what I imagined that it could be, and that is the best feeling you can ever have when you're watching something.
We didn't do a lot of takes. Like it was moving fairly quickly, but you still don't get that sense of continuity, especially shooting things out of order.
So, from my expectations, being behind the scenes to what I saw on screen was just astonishing. And I think it really catches that vibe of the sort of the Hammer films, but with this really nice kind of, feminist twist to it.
I personally was blown away just by how beautiful the picture looked. It's very like lush, like the scenery is gorgeous, and if I may toot my horn, the actors are gorgeous.
Just look at it and go, oh my God, the color, the composition of the shots, the way this there's just this feeling that comes across in all these different scenes. When Elizabeth and Fantine are having their lover conversations, and there's soft music playing in the background, and they're speaking French, I just felt like I'm here. I'm in this place. I know for a solid fact that I'm not in this place, that this is not the real place. I know that over here there's probably something that shouldn't be there, and when we're in the Church of Bathor, it's 1 inch to the left or right of frame is madness that can't be shown. But it doesn't feel that way for a second watching it, even having been involved in it. So that was just the coolest experience. You can only hope to have that. I'd be so lucky to ever experience anything like that again. But it was the best time I've ever had watching something I've been in. And so consequently, I went to a bunch of the screenings.
So when I got to the premiere, somehow overnight I was still stoned. It didn't wear off exactly, and so I was just very out of it. I felt like I was in another reality. So you can imagine how surreal it was to then watch an allegorical vampire film in which I get dismembered on a giant screen. You really cannot put that into words.
So, The Blood is the Life. It's such a strange, I think like any great piece of mythical symbolism or text that accompanies a mythos, it has all of these different applied meanings. For me, it has different symbolic meanings. So post-film, the Blood is the Life, using it as a hashtag Blood is the Life, and then there was a Blood is the Life page on Facebook, so I could very conveniently just hot link or whatever people say in modern times to that page and just use this as a reference. It was for me, after the film, it was almost like part of me forgot that Grando is the worst person, literally the worst person in the world, and that we're all just vampires, guys, which is so funny because thinking about that now, it's sort of like, it's like Grando's way of hashtagging all lives matter or something.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life. Then I got scared, like the sunlight hit something the wrong way, and I thought I had a gray pubic hair. But I didn't. It's all good. I didn't.
The blood is the life.
Le sang est la vie.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life went from being like my and probably a lot of the cast members' rallying cry of like, yeah, we were in this great movie together, and it turned into like, oh, this is like a mocking phrase representing the actual rallying cry of the religious right, or the religious, so confusing, right.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
Blood is the life.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I got naked on film was actually like, I was super nervous and stuff like that. Like, because it was like, you're like, oh man, how are they gonna make me look? And then, and trust me, like when some people were like, oh, I just seen you in this, like, how's it going? They get a bad angle of you. They're like, oh, maybe he's got a nice personality or something. You know what I mean? So it's kind of rough when you.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life. Motherfucking blood life.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life.
You love Baethor, and I'm looking at Stabby, and I'm like, you suck Baethor's dick, like it just came out, and I didn't really think it would be on. But that's kind of just the mood where it took, and if it on screen, then so be it.
The blood is the life.
The blood is the life. The blood is the life. Hell yeah.
Yeah, that's a microphone.